Welcome to the Zweig Letter Podcast, putting architectural, engineering, planning, and environmental consulting advice and guidance in your ear. Zweig Group's team of experts have spent more than 3 decades elevating the industry by helping AEP and environmental consulting firms thrive. And these podcasts deliver invaluable management, industry, client, marketing, and HR advice directly to you, free of charge. The Zweig Letter Podcasts, elevating the design industry one episode at a time.
Hey folks, and welcome back to another episode of the Zweig Letter Podcast. I'm your host, Randy Wilburn, and I'm excited to be with you today as always. We have a great episode in store for you. I really want to give a shout out to Christopher Parsons from Knowledge Architecture. I've known Chris for several years now, and he has connected me with some amazing people in the design industry that are specifically working on how we aggregate and disseminate information, right? Technically and otherwise. And I think this next guest is no exception to that rule. And I'm so excited to have Reg Prentice, who is the CEO of TonicDM, on this episode. And this is one of those episodes that you're going to want to save. You're going to want to rewind and watch again and gain some insight and information. But Reg is an amazing individual and somebody that I'm glad that we've been able to bring on the podcast to kind of talk about what he's doing and learn about how he is helping firms aggregate and utilize the information that design firms capture on a daily basis. Because you and I both know that every firm, both near and far, capture a lot of data and a lot of information. The challenge that every firm faces is how we access that information, how we disseminate that information, how that information impacts the role of mentoring within the confines of a design organization. There are so many implications when it comes to how you deal with data and how you access that data and whether or not you have access to that data in a way that is usable, right? Because it's one thing to just take a bunch of drawings and some files and some notes and some emails from a specific project and just file it away in your Google Drive or in your AWS or in your Dropbox. It's a whole nother thing to be able to have recall for that information that you've stored. And Reg is going to spend some time today talking about what TonicDM does, but more importantly, just what he has learned over the years in his time in the design industry space. So without further ado, I hope that was okay, Reg. Welcome to the Zweig Letter Podcast.
Yep. Thanks, Randy. It's great to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So tell us just a little bit about yourself and your background. And then let's start talking a little bit about TonicDM and some of the problems that you're solving for the design firms everywhere.
Yeah. So my background is from architecture school. So I'm a graduate architecture school, but not a licensed architect. Even at school, I was very quickly the computer nerd in the computer lab as we had. And for the initial firms that I worked for, that was when CAD was just coming to be a kind of standard thing in firms. So that was kind of my role, became the person who knew about CAD and helped the firm with that. So right from the beginning of my career, it was about design technology for me. And immediately my kind of brain went into information structure and how firms were organizing their files in the network drive and putting some structure around that. CAD, just the structure of the CAD files themselves and layers and all those kinds of things. So pretty quickly it was about information for me and information management. I think the flow of information, just the amount of information that individuals in the firm had to deal with, that was kind of I think right from the beginning, that was a problem that I kind of saw and was trying to work on making life easier for the staff in the firms.
So you got your architectural degree, you didn't get licensed, and then you decided to you saw a need, I guess I would say, based on your experiences, as you matriculated through the university. That's kind of where you as we like to say, you what's the best way to express this? You kind of, you kneeled in and you focused in on that one thing and said, hey, how can we do this better? And based on what you shared with me on a previous conversation that we had, you've worked with some pretty stellar firms and you cut your teeth, if you will, in this design industry space, in this area of information management. Can you talk just a little bit about that?
Yeah. The first kind of full-time job I had was with Frank Gehry, which came from work I was doing at university, research work with Mark Burry, who is an architect on the Sagrada Familia, Gaudi's church in Barcelona. So it was an interesting one because we were in New Zealand. I was at university in Wellington, and it was early days of the internet. So Mark was able to hook up to a server in Barcelona, and we would do work, and he could even print on their printer. So that was kind of early intro to computers and 3D modeling specifically, and script writing, doing analysis of Gaudi's models using Lisp routines and AutoCAD. And so that is what led me to Frank Gehry's office, who was also working on complex shapes using similar kinds of software that we were using at the university in New Zealand. So that was a great connection to make. And then I spent 11 years at Gehry's office. And it was definitely a journey. When I started, it was really about CAD management and writing Lisp routines. But I think over time, it was really the information and the flow of information which I really gravitated towards, just how things are organized, how they're structured, how people share, and that kind of thing. So information flows. And I ended up writing some, like the extranet and the intranet, and even the public website for Frank's office. And then I went to Gensler, which again was a really interesting experience. I was there for 9 years. So it was really a very long journey. It wasn't getting to the point of starting a software company around information management. You know, it was pretty much exactly 20 years that I'd actually been working in the industry on the kind of IT or digital design side.
Yeah. So, I mean, you can make the argument and say that TonicDM was developed in a lab of real practice for 20 years, right? And what we see now with this new company that you're about to talk about is the culmination of your experiences at these two firms.
Right. And I think about it as a career path. It's always easy to say, man, if I just started this 20 years earlier, like, it would be huge now, you know?
Yeah. Or like they say, overnight sensation. So
yeah, but I'm not sure that you can do that, right? Because the point of the tech company right now is the culmination of having just sat, and it's a very slow process, right? To sit with people at their desk, watch what they're doing, watch them click through things, help them come up with different solutions and try them, right? And try, an enormous number of available commercial solutions, like before actually stepping into it myself. So in one way, I kind of beat myself up like, man, I could have started this so much earlier. And another way, I feel like if I had started it earlier, it wouldn't have been this. Yeah. It would have been probably just the same as all the other tools out there. And there isn't much point in that, right? Just creating another version of what's already out there.
Well, I mean, I think the reality is that you would have still had to iterate through several processes and several evolutions of what you've now created. It's just that you were that much further along when you decided to create TonicDM, and it was, kind of fully formed, right? And so that's the beauty of it. You're not a noob as far as this is concerned. When you created TonicDM, you were ready to rock and roll at that point.
Yeah. And I think a differentiated point of view is something that I remember from our kind of leadership courses at Gensler. It's important to have a differentiated point of view. And I think that's also true, not just for, let's say, leaders in architecture firms, but also for leaders in technology firms. And so there were core things that came out of my time in firms. The primary one being the value of simplicity and being tasked with training and rolling out systems in firms and just seeing how even something which appears simple, it's not simple to the person whose process has to change. And the time spent learning software by staff, it's already maxed out, right? It's not a good thing to come in with a software that might be incredibly amazing, but also requires a huge amount of learning because people just don't have the bandwidth for that. They don't have it now. I'm not sure they ever did.
Yeah.
So just realizing things like whatever we deliver has to be really simple. It has to be functional, but it can't be unnecessarily complex. So there's just things like that, which I'm not sure I would have had if I'd started the company more just with a tech background without having, sat with staff for 20 years, working on technology with.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. And I totally understand what you're saying. So tell us a little bit about TonicDM. Why don't you kind of unwrap how TonicDM came about that you decided to just start a company?
Yeah. So there were two parts to it. One was just seeing the rate of flow of information and how difficult it is to organize that efficiently on a project so that the firm can get value from it. A design firm, the two most valuable things people have, a design firm has is its people, number one, right? That's obviously always going to be the case. But number two is really its history and its institutional knowledge, which primarily exists in the form of the information that's stored. And today that's all digital. It's practically all digital. When I started in the profession, it was practically all physical, but that switch has taken place. And then the second one was just seeing how tools that were used in the industry constrained people's understanding of the value that they provide. So to be more specific, the focus of digital tools on deliverables, I think, has subtly led people into focusing or seeing the value that their firm creates as deliverables, which, when you say it like that, I'm not sure I'm sure everyone would say, well, clearly it's not the deliverables that are our value. But the way that the tools are structured, it kind of forces you into that paradigm. So particularly tools like BIM, are very deliverables oriented. And so Tonic is kind of also a platform for design thinking, right? And how tools that people use, even though it is, just a tool, but how that tool can help firms kind of engage with design thinking and design value more. I'd say that's more of a long-term goal with Tonic. I wouldn't be promoting Tonic as, currently being that, but yeah.
Yeah. So, and how long has Tonic been in existence now?
So 8 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. 8 years. Okay. And
so it really is the 10-year overnight success.
Right. Well, you've made it past that 5-year hump, right? And now you're almost going to double that, which is pretty exciting. Yep. And certainly, clearly, there is a need for what you have to offer for design firms. I'd be curious to know, and you don't have to go all the way back to the beginning, but what is like the biggest aha moment that firms have when they start utilizing TonicDM within their organization? If you had to kind of capture the essence of what that is.
I think it's the being able to have a stash of important information or information of significance that is clearly arranged by project in a way that is very easy for staff just to find the project, open the project, and there is the information of significance. So we work with a wide range of firms, and it ranges from firms where project numbers and just the basic idea of a project is very fixed within their systems, all the way to firms where they don't even use project numbers outside of accounting. So their files on their folder system or on their network are organized just by project name without the project number. And then it's, again, when you say it, it seems like such a a prosaic thing, but project numbering changes over time. You have sub numbers. Some companies will put the client number in their project number. It's actually quite a source of debate. It's just how you number projects, how those flow through proposal stage and issuing proposals, and then into a billable stage, and then into an archive stage. And, when is a project over? Like that, that's a very subjective thing. So the first thing about Tonic is we organize everything around project numbers, and we work with each firm to do a bit of customization about how Tonic will see project numbers in their firm. So we have scripts that we implement on a per company basis. So some companies will strip off everything after the last dot. So it's quite common to have a project number, and then .000 might be the kind of in quotes main project, and then there's sub projects under that. So we'll often customize the way the project numbers come into Tonic. Nearly all our customers link Tonic to their accounting system so that the projects are automatically generated. But that immediately just gets to the point. You're not going to put every part of every project into a system like Tonic. You want Tonic to represent what is the project from an overall contract point of view, and from a perception point of view as to what the staff perceive as being the bucket called project. And then once Tonic is kind of established in the firm like that, the email, file transfers, CA information, contact information kind of almost magnetically kind of goes into the projects. We've kind of implemented many different ways to automate or semi-automate how information gets put in the project, and to make it the easiest path for staff. So that if you want to transfer files, it's easier to do it in Tonic than it is to go to your personal Dropbox or some other system. So that over time, you have this confidence that you go to Tonic, you just type in any part of the project name or number, you click on it, and voila, you have the set of correspondence, aka email, from all the different people in the firm collected in one place that you can reference. You have the file transfers, organized by date and by who they're from and who they're to. You have the CA information, and it's having confidence that that stuff will be there that I think makes a huge difference. That now, instead of kind of scrambling through many different systems looking for what you need, there's one kind of place that is properly organized with a clean set of data.
Yeah. And I mean, it sounds like the way you say it, it sounds simple enough, right? But the reality is that I won't say most, but do you have even an idea of the percentage of firms that don't do or have any type of real structure like what you've just described across the board in the design industry space? I don't know if there's data behind that.
I don't know that it's a data-driven opinion, but I would say there are very few firms that we engage with where I would say are close to zero, right? Like pretty much every firm has started the journey and is somewhere along that path. So things like naming the network folders beginning with the project number, I would say most firms do that, like 95% do that already. It's rare you find a company where there's no project number in the file path. The rigorousness of that still varies. Like, when I'm kind of advising companies, I like to see it very rigorous because, there's contracts involved as well, right, that need to be matched to the information that's saved. And then I think where it really starts to break down for firms is one is email, because email by default is organized by person, not by project. So people get emails and people have mailboxes. And it's very hard to cross over mailboxes. Like, I haven't seen any firms where everyone has access to everyone else's mailbox.
Right.
Generally, you only have access to your own. And,
yeah. But are you supposing or saying that, like, if everybody has this kind of central repository of putting data in a place, then everybody has access to it, not necessarily to your specific email, but maybe to the information that was referenced in that email?
No, I would say, in Tonic, by default, everyone has access to everyone else's email. So it is a copying system. So emails are copied from staff mailboxes into the central Tonic repository. And you don't have to trigger that, right? So you could choose to have emails stay in your mailbox and not be copied to the company Tonic project store. And there are also some features for confidentiality, right, and locking projects so that not everyone can get in there. So there's some basic roles around that. But for the average email, it will be in Tonic and everyone will have access to it.
Okay.
So,
yeah.
and the key for that is that often questions come maybe a couple of years later, and the people on the project may have even left the firm, right? And so the person tasked with answering that question, like they either have to go to individual staff mailboxes from the past and try to find the information just from a mailbox, right? Which is practically impossible, right?
Yeah.
Or they can just, in 1 minute, they can go to Tonic, type in the project name or number, and there is all the email in a filterable and searchable way. So, some firms see the value mostly in the archive to go back later, but it's also very valuable while the project's going on because not everyone is on every email. And particularly a project manager may come onto a project partway through and they kind of need to know what's being discussed already. And, if it's structural engineering, they can just filter by that firm and see all the emails on that project relating to structural. So there is value both while the project is going on, but also for the archive for later as well.
Yeah, no, that sounds exciting because I think what it does is one of the problems that it solves is, and I talk about this all the time, is just the proper transfer of knowledge, right? Not just between generations within a design firm, but between colleagues, right? You're down the way in a cubicle and I'm here in a cubicle. And, it's like, how do we get the information or get access to information that I need that you've had or that you've processed? Right. And so I think it's important to figure out how you make that as seamless as possible, because that transfer of knowledge, that transfer of information is vital to a design firm. I mean, it's vital to any organization, any vertical that we talk about, but primarily we're talking about design firms here and how important the information is. And you talk very elegantly about information and the flow of that data. So I think it's important for people to understand that you can't just by mere happenstance fall into a program like Tonic. You have to really think about what you need. And then I'm assuming that when companies reach out to you to inquire, you kind of take a high level view of what they're doing and make recommendations from there.
We do. Yeah. People come to Tonic at different points in their journey, but our engagement with a firm is typically quite long before they make a purchase. So there are firms that we've been talking to for 5 years, right?
Wow. Okay.
Which is fine, right? They're watching Tonic develop, seeing when is the right time to, that Tonic will work for them. But the typical cycle would be about 3 months. So we'll have initial conversations and talk about their need first, right? Because just from an efficiency point of view on both sides, we don't want to go into a deep dive if it's just not suitable for them. So we'll talk about them and where they are in their journey and how their information is organized and what they want to achieve from it. And then we'll, show them the product, obviously, and how the product would work for them. But then usually, as you kind of assume, Randy, there's quite a period of back and forth. Like, okay, if we did it this way, how would that work for us? And a lot of it is to do with people as well. Like, this person needs to do this, or how would this person's role change, or how would the way they complete their work change? So usually there is quite a lot of discussion along those lines, which is the part that I enjoy the most, right? Is talking to firms about their process and the information flows, and how they can get more from that information.
Well, yeah, I mean, you gain great insight and data that informs how you interact with other firms. So, I mean, certainly exactly. That is hugely valuable.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. And that's kind of how I saw myself when I was in practice as well, is that, most of what I knew I'd learned from someone else in the firm, right? So I was kind of like a node or a connector where I'd be like, oh yeah, you should actually just go talk to this person because they've done it already.
Yeah.
And so that continues when I'm talking to firms, through the Tonic lens.
Okay. And do you primarily deal with like CTOs or a CTO-like individual, or do you find like COOs or operational leaders are the ones that you primarily communicate with on something like this?
Yeah, that's an interesting one, because initially I would have assumed it would be more a COO thing.
Yeah.
But it is primarily a CTO, CIO, IT manager. It's often not digital design related people who tend to focus more on creating information, right? And they're almost half in the architect camp, working on projects. So it's often the person whose responsibility it is to manage the data that we first talk to. But in all cases, after having spoken to us about it, they'll bring in the other stakeholders within the firm who also, want to see it and participate in the decision making. But it is what you might call an enterprise decision. So even for small firms, it's not a small decision. It's like, this is a platform that's going to manage and archive and store our data. So it's not like people just, try it a little bit and then, walk away. It's like, it's a serious decision they make. And so that often takes, building a relationship, understanding their problem quite deeply on our side, and them understanding the solution quite deeply on their side.
Yeah. And you mentioned size. So I'm assuming you would work with a small firm all the way up to the big types of firms like a Gensler or somebody like that. So it doesn't really matter, right? You could be a 10-person shop and TonicDM could help them.
Yeah. We have many customers. We have only a few at the 1 and 2 person, because that's an architect who is naturally predisposed to organization. And so right from the beginning of their journey as an independent architect, they'll look for something like Tonic, knowing that they need that. That's part of their set of tools, but that's less common. So it's more usually around the 10, 15, 20 size that firms will start to get interested in this. And then most of our customers would be between, let's say, 50 and 1,000 people. But because it's a cloud-based system, so there's nothing that gets installed on your devices or your servers. Everything is in the cloud. So the setup process is actually surprisingly similar between, let's say, a 5-person firm and a 500-person firm.
Yeah.
And that you connect it into your Microsoft, or if you have, we do support other platforms too, but you connect it into your Microsoft, you connect it into your accounting system typically, although smaller firms often skip that step. And then you set up your projects and you're pretty much ready to go. It takes usually only about an hour to 2 hours to set the whole thing up, regardless of firm size. So that's one of the advantages of cloud software, is that it can, small firms get the same software and the same experience as even the largest firms do.
Yeah, I love that. I love when companies are able to offer a service where, they don't have like a silver level and a gold and a platinum level, but like it's one size fits all, and then it scales based on how much usage you have, right? So I love that type of setup, because then that means you get everything right out of the box.
Right. And, just as part of our obsession with simplicity, it makes that possible, right? Because it needs to be simple for large firms, just like small firms. And it's quite surprising. Like, you'd think large firms have, enormous IT resources, so it wouldn't be a problem. And the fact is, large firms do have amazing IT resources, but they are still overwhelmed, right? They have way too much to do. And they don't want this kind of thing dropped on them with some heavy lift. They would much rather it take a couple of hours of their time when it's up and running. So that actually works the same for both ends of the scale, right? Small firms maybe don't have the knowledge, so they need it to be simple. But the large firms, they have the knowledge, but they still don't have the time to deal with a complex system.
Yeah. I didn't think I'd get a Biggie Smalls reference in this podcast, but just like there's more money, more problems, there, more projects, more problems, I mean, it just because, you have more projects, you think, oh, we're making more money, but that creates more problems when it comes to corralling that information and gaining control of it. So,
yeah. And that is a system design issue where you want the amount of effort to scale kind of non-linearly. You don't want the amount of effort to scale up exponentially. You want it to actually just stay very low, no matter how many projects a firm has. And so, yeah, that's one of the things that we've built into Tonic is just that it doesn't really matter how many projects you have. The complexity doesn't increase with that.
Yeah. So, of course, I'm going to ask you this question, which everybody's asking nowadays. And I have a few distinct questions before we wind this conversation up. How do you, because I just spent the weekend sitting on my brother-in-law's couch watching every AI video that I could watch, right? Because I'm a big AI fan. I'm using AI quite a bit. As a matter of fact, AI absolutely has changed things in terms of the way that I process and manage information when it comes to the podcast that I do. Because I don't just do the Zweig Letter podcast. I actually have my own personal podcast that I do here in Northwest Arkansas. And then I help companies all over the country manage their podcasts and run them. And AI has been a game changer for me. I'm curious to how you see AI informing what you do at TonicDM, and are you already incorporating it into the workflow?
So I also am a huge user of AI. So I spent most of my weekend chatting with ChatGPT.
Kindred spirits. Here we go. Okay.
Yep. And I find it hugely beneficial for just being able to know a technology exists and just learn about it so quickly. And when it comes to writing computer software, which I don't do professionally because we have real software engineers that do that at Tonic, but I'm doing things related to software programming. It is amazing. Yeah, it is really incredible. So it's changed my life, right? And so you would think that Tonic would immediately see how AI could change and benefit the profession. But I would say I find that question much more difficult. So what we're doing with it at the moment is organizing information, which sounds like what we just talked about.
Right.
But a problem that I see for design firms getting the benefit of AI is that information is hugely contextual, right? So knowing that something worked in one circumstance doesn't mean that it's going to work in another. And so the way that we are building towards offering customers AI enhancement is by looking at how we can add more parameters to the data that we store for them. So first, having your email organized by project in a database-driven system like Tonic is a huge step forward, because without having emails organized by project, asking AI to answer a question is going to be very difficult, right? Because it's not going to know whether this email relates to a school. Well, at some point, presumably it will, but at the moment, it needs some context around it. So we're increasingly making Tonic have more context. And I think search, within the context of a project, AI can make search more interesting because you don't have to know the exact word. You can kind of ask for a concept and have it bring that back. But that has to be still bounded by project, and it still has to respect the security, like the role-based security we were talking about before. If someone has filed an email confidential in the project, AI also can't reveal the content of that email.
Yeah, so that's a good point.
In an enterprise sense, it's trickier than in a personal sense, right? Because if you just want general information, say you're interested in Greek mythology, right? ChatGPT just is incredible, right? But when the information store is an enterprise information store, there are a lot more overlays in terms of how that information relates to the person asking for it. But we're not jumping into kind of the AI bandwagon, let's say. We're looking at how can we do more of what we do well, which is organize information in a way that will benefit AI at some point for the firm.
Yeah. Well, and I think you have to think with AI in mind now as you develop and you start to process things. I'm doing that now and just thinking about what GPT-5 is going to look like, because that's supposed to be coming down the pike in the next 7 to 12 months. And it's, as they say, it's going to be a game changer. And I can only imagine. I mean, I'm already building my own small, large, I won't call them large language learning models. They're small language learning models, but I'm creating them just on my information. And you're and for me, it's perfect, because then I get to kind of process this information in a totally different way than just kind of the way that you would normally search for data. And so it's kind of amazing, to be honest with you. I'm using Google Notebook, which is kind of like my sandbox for kind of playing with language learning models to see what they're like. But I'm in the process of creating one for my a website where I have 5 years worth of podcast data, worth of transcripts that I want to make searchable so people can find out any information that they want. And eventually, at some point in time, I want to be able to do it for the Zweig Letter podcast. So stay tuned, listeners. We will have an ability for you to search, because I mean, I have some amazing interviews from this podcast dating all the way back to 2016 when Mark Zweig and I first started sitting down and recording it. So there's all kinds of information that is valuable to people and to the end user. And so I think AI is really going to make a difference for us all. I mean, I'm stating the obvious, but it's just going to be interesting to see how it plays out in different pockets. And so in the pocket that you're in with TonicDM and how that impacts the day-to-day workflow of a design professional, I think it's going to be really interesting to see how that plays out.
And I would say I'm fairly opinionated on that. I wrote a blog post for at TonicDM.com. We have a little, I'd say it's emerging, but we have some content we're putting there. So for practitioners who are thinking about how AI is going to affect them as designers, I always fall on the side of kind of humanism. And I think to the extent that a firm produces deliverables with no creative input, I think that's an area where they may want to be very careful, because AI might be able to do that pretty well. But I'm guessing for the listeners of this podcast, they mostly perhaps wouldn't put themselves in the category of having no creative input. But to the extent that a firm works with their clients to understand who they are as people and to solve to come up with a spatial solution to what that person needs, I think that part of being a designer won't be replaced by AI. So I think of what an architect does as understanding the unexpressed desires of their clients and being able to come up with a spatial solution that meets the needs of their client, even though the client didn't express those needs. And that comes from experience and knowledge and just empathy. And that's where I see the value of design lying. And, if it's a smaller residential project, it might be quite a simple client organization. Like it might be one person is the client. But often designers work in situations where the client is incredibly complex. Like the users are not the same as the owner, who may not be the same as the person providing the money. And so it's an incredible skill that designers have to be able to listen to and integrate all the needs of these diverse populations, even the community at large and the environment and our customers in a way of a firm. And I think if you do that well, I don't think you have anything to worry about when it comes to AI. I mean, slowly AI will help you produce drawings and it'll help you do all kinds of pragmatic things. But I think your value as a design firm won't change. And that is understanding the needs of a client, even though the client themselves can't express those needs.
Yeah. Here. I agree with you 100%. You did say one thing that stood out to me in our previous conversation that I wanted to bring up before we close. And you said, and I'm kind of paraphrasing here, you noted that digital tools have made mentorship and collaboration more abstract and difficult to engage in with files stored in folders rather than visible on a board. And mentorship has always been a big thing to me. And, we used to talk about management by walking around, right? And just physically interacting with people. And now with all this data and information being stored in these places that we can't even see, one of your hypotheses has been that it does create a challenge for mentorship. How do we overcome that? And do you have any recommendations for our listeners in this area? And have you found that TonicDM is able to help overcome some of that? Or is it just an issue that you're still trying to find a solution for?
Yeah. And as a very skeptical person, as I was working in firms, I was trying to understand the downsides of computers, as much as the things they're beneficial for. And that's something that did strike me as quite a big change when CAD took over from hand drafting, was that you couldn't see it anymore if you were walking around the office. So you can obviously look over someone's shoulder and see their computer screen, but most likely they're zoomed into a detail. It wasn't like when you had a full-size board and just by looking over someone's shoulder, you could get a holistic sense of what they were doing. So I would recommend and I think architects are generally like this, is print stuff out and put it on the walls. Make paper models or just find ways to get the work out of the computer. And I think it annoys me when what I call the digital zealots kind of resist people working outside the computer because, in theory, everything is more efficient if everything is in one piece of software inside one computer, right? Or one computer network. But that just doesn't work creatively. Like different tools think differently. And so different designers will gravitate towards different tools. And if the value of the firm is in the design, to me, it doesn't make sense to handicap a designer by telling them what design tool they should use. Like if someone works best in SketchUp and they produce higher quality designs because SketchUp just thinks like they do, isn't that the most important thing for the firm, is to get the highest value design from them, regardless of what tool it is? Some people Rhino, some people Photoshop or some drawing programs. Some people it is indeed Revit that thinks like them the most. And so for that group of people, obviously, Revit might be the best choice for design, but that's not everybody. Design is obviously distinct from documentation. So I would say the firm needs a consistent documentation platform. You don't want people documenting the result in different platforms. But a lot of cases, I think it's also physical media that allows people to think the clearest. So I think engaging with sketching on paper and physical modeling, and of course now you can iterate through by printing, scanning, drawing on top of, right? And then scanning back in, printing again. And the same even with 3D models. You can create a physical object, then you can scan that physical object into the computer, manipulate it digitally, and then reprint it, right? Or if you have like a laser cutter, you can reproduce it. So you can go in and out of the computer. And that's something that Frank Gehry's office obviously is extremely good at, is using the computer and physical media together, and also just using the space as a way to get things out of the computer. So if you go into, or if you've ever seen pictures of Frank's office, it's just full of stuff, right? And in one way, it looks like a mess, but in another way, it allows people to walk past and see and learn and comment on things in a way that if it was fully digital, you would have to be opening and closing files, which is just not an opportunity for serendipity. And I think the way that relates to mentorship is just, if senior people are walking around the office, what do they see? Like, do they have any entry point into what a more junior person is doing or what they are thinking, right? And if things are too digital, I think there's a problem there, right? And so one way, perhaps, to counteract that would be to print more, pen up more, maybe even work more on paper. And again, the deliverables, you don't want to be printing like a huge set every night, right? But when it comes to design, the number of materials is much, much smaller. And then, obviously people still print and work through sets with a red pen. And in one way, that's in quotes, a waste of paper. But in another way, it allows people to just walk up and interact with something in a serendipitous way.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I still think the human brain processes information that way in a more efficient manner. So I think it's not, to me, it's not an or, it's an and, right? It's like, how do we do this and, keep things in the real world in front of us, right? Because we need that. It's the same argument we make for FaceTime versus a Zoom call. It's like, there is a real tangible benefit to being face to face, kneecap to kneecap with somebody, because a lot of stuff gets lost in translation online. And I think the same would apply to digital data and information that we are consuming on our computer screens.
Yeah. And certainly the rise of AI and digital communications, I think, makes physical meeting even more valuable. And so I'm looking forward to meeting Randy in person at the Architect Conference later in the year. But, it's like that meeting will be materially different than what we're doing now, right? And I think AI makes that even more valuable because there's so much opportunity for manipulation and intermediation with AI that just meeting someone and knowing that they're a real person is going to become increasingly important.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Relationships, it's the R word, as I like to say, and it's extremely valuable. And there is no replacement for real relationships being developed in skin and flesh. And, of course, I know that virtuality will be a thing at some point in time, and that we'll be able to have a hologram of each other and sit down on my couch behind me and have a conversation, but we're not quite there yet. And then at some point in time, the Trekkie in me is loving the idea of just being able to transport myself somewhere. Don't know if I'll see that in my lifetime, but I'm sure we'll be able to assemble and disassemble atoms, disassemble people at an atomic level to be able to do that. But we're not there yet.
I'm not going to be the one who's going to offer to go first. Put it that way.
No, I will not be signing up for that one. That's for sure. So, well, Reg, if people listening to this want to get in contact with you, what's the best way for them to do that? With the understanding that everything that Reg has referenced here on this call, we're going to certainly put in the show notes. You'll have access to all that, and I'll put Reg's LinkedIn profile in the show notes. But certainly our Zweig Letter Podcast audience is a very loyal audience. But if people want to get in contact with you to find out more about TonicDM, what do they need to do?
I think LinkedIn is probably the best. I don't usually accept people from outside the industry, right?
Sure.
But I will connect with anyone who's AEC related. So just reach out that way. I think it's probably the easiest.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we'll put a link to all of that in the show notes so people have access to that. And again, we'll link to TonicDM so that people can check out more about what Reg and the rest of his team are doing. They're based in LA. So I think it'll be good for you, the listener, to take a closer look at what we've been talking about for the last 50 minutes. I think there's some really, really valuable information and insight that you can glean from to kind of figure out what the next steps are for you. If you feel like you are struggling under the digital divide of information that exists, especially in our industry. So, Reg, I can't thank you enough for joining me. And once again, Chris is batting 1,000 with the people that he has told me that I need to have on this podcast. You are another amazing podcast guest, and I want to thank you so, so much. I do look forward to meeting you in person, and so that we can sit down and really catch up that way. But I appreciate all the wonderful work that you're doing. Keep doing it, man. I'm rooting for you. I'm rooting for not just your success, but the success of TonicDM, and more importantly, how that will continue to impact this industry. So thank you so much.
Yeah. And thank you, Randy. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, there you have it, folks. That's another episode of the Zweig Letter Podcast. To learn more about one of the oldest newsletters in the design industry, visit zweiggroup.com. You can read articles online, listen to this podcast, and sign up for a free subscription to the newsletter and have it delivered right to your email inbox every Monday morning. Sign up today. For more info about Zweig Group's advisory services or any Zweig Group publications, visit zweiggroup.com. You can subscribe to the Zweig Letter Podcast wherever you listen to it. And please, please, please consider rating and reviewing us on Apple Podcasts. I'm your host, Randy Wilburn, and we'll see you back here real soon for another new episode of the Zweig Letter Podcast. Peace.
Thanks for tuning in to the Zweig Letter Podcast. We hope that you can be part of elevating the industry and that you can apply our advice and information to your daily professional life. For a free digital subscription to the Zweig Letter, please visit thezweigletter.com/subscribe to gain more wisdom and inspiration, in addition to information about leadership, finance, HR, and marketing your firm. Subscribe today.